Well, thank you very much for being here. We are very excited with Olga to be in this session today and have the possibility to talk in a more informal way and to receive all your questions that some things that maybe you have been thinking during the module or things that you just start thinking about them now while we are speaking. So we would really like to encourage you to send your opinions, your questions, and try to have a dialogue, if we can say that, during this session. I'm with Olga Espinosa, here in Chile. My name is Alejandra Mera. I was in charge of the first part of the course. I'm a lawyer and also an academic. I've been involved in criminal justice matters all my academic development, mainly these last years in matters related with juvenile justice system and restorative justice in general, and also in criminology. So my approach is in part from the law, in part from public policy, and in part from criminology in general. So, well, welcome again. We didn't get questions from you in this part of the course, but there are some topics that have been very interesting for students or are very interesting in this matter specifically. So with Olga, we're going to address them. But we really hope that you get involved in the chat and you can put there your own opinions or your questions. So, well, the first thing that I would like to address today is about this question of regarding to restorative justice related to less serious crimes. And this is because generally, when countries start to introduce restorative justice processes or mechanisms, there is the first idea is introduce these mechanisms in a range of less serious crime because it is thought that is a less punitive reaction, so it shouldn't be available for more serious crimes. So let's say it like that. Well, we start with less serious crimes and then we'll see. Or we start with children and then we see if they work, we go ahead with adults. But I think that this is not a great idea for three main reasons. First, restorative justice is less efficient in conflicts that are not very serious. And this is because the potential of restorative justice is to restore the relationship between people after a conflict, and also restore elements of personal health in both or in more people involved in the conflict. For that reason, in less serious crimes, the conflicts are less death. So there's not so much to restore there. So the power of restorative justice to give an opportunity to the parties involved in a conflict to get together, to talk about the conflict, to resolve it together again, and to implement measures of reparation in the future is less feasible in this type of conflict. The second reason is that when you do that, when you just take less serious crimes and apply restorative justice for that area of criminality, there is a danger of net widening the control of the criminal justice system. because sometimes there is a lot of conflicts that are dealt outside the criminal justice system. But now, if you introduce restorative justice measures within the criminal justice system and then approach just that part of criminality, in reality, you are not replacing the more punitive approximations to crime, but you are adding, more control. So the net is widened, So is a way to increase the criminalization instead of decrease it. And one of the main principles of restorative justice processes and the restorative justice movement is to help to reduce the punitivity. So if you do that, if you just add some criminality and use restorative justice for that, instead of replace the criminal justice system, the traditional criminal justice system, you are indeed going against the principles of restorative justice approaches. And the third reason is that in that informal criminality, or when you are talking about things that are not generally taken seriously in the criminal justice system, you have less tools to control the development of them. So if you leave a restorative justice approach to some criminality because you think that it's not serious, or because the intervention is not going to be that dangerous, you have the risk, or you risk that all these measures are not going to be controlled. So that is another important reason to not to reduce the possibilities of criminal justice, of restorative justice interventions to this type of criminality, but to try to replace some interventions of the traditional criminal justice with restorative justice practices, and in that way impact in the results of the criminal justice system in general. Well, a second issue is the opposite from what we have been talking. So you say, okay, if it is not just focused, or shouldn't be focused, in less serious crime, so what happens in the serious crimes? Is restorative justice really feasible, really good to deal with more serious criminality, or are these processes always good or always possible to deal with serious crime? Well, in reality, it's a very complex question, and there are more complex answers for the question, because traditionally we think that more serious crimes deserve the more punitive approaches. So the biggest punishment, So it's not very intuitive to say, okay, no, with more serious crimes, we think that we should use more, or in equal way, these measures. But the reality is that the serious criminality impacts in a deeper way in people, and the conflicts that involve serious criminality is also the impact is more prejudicial for the persons. So these criminal justice, restorative justice approaches, which rely on empathy between the people, with possibilities of do a reparation that have some meaning, it is more probable to get this objective in a conflict that is more serious. In the literature, this effect is proven mainly with victims of serious crimes that have been in a restorative justice process, continually says that the positive impact in their mental health, and to reduce the post-traumatic stress of these measures. And in comparison with the criminal justice system, this is huge. So that is one reason to facilitate these processes in this type of conflicts. But this is not this is not to say that restorative justice is going to replace the criminal justice system at all. Mainly for one practical reason. The first limitation of restorative justice processes is the voluntary participation of the parts involved. So if the victim or the perpetrator don't want to go to a restorative justice meeting, well, restorative justice is not used, and the criminal justice process, the traditional criminal justice, has to be used. So really the question is if there should be an absolute limitation for serious crimes to get into criminal justice processes. I said before that there are reasons not to limit it, but in general, legislations generally say, establish that some crimes, homicide, sexual abuse, etc., should be outside, independently of the aims of the people involved about that. But there are other legislations, like in Northern Ireland or in New Zealand, mainly about the juvenile justice system, like they don't put any limit. And the limit is not established regarding the seriousness of the crime, but in the people. If the people want to go, indeed, the judges they have to offer a criminal restorative conference to all of the people that get into the criminal justice system. It's an obligation. And the people involved in the conflict, they have to decide if they want to go. So the decision is not made by the state, the decision is made by the people. So, and that, I think that is a key core of the restorative justice approach. The conflict is owned by the people who were, subject or participants of the conflict, mainly. The government, the state, they have to organize the legality of the sessions. They can decide everything about that, but the decision to use this measure is owned by the people, and that is very different. It's a very different approach from the traditional criminal justice system, which understands the conflict, the criminal conflict between as a problem between the person, and the state. But finally, I would like to say something about this. The mediator, the role of the mediator or the facilitator is key in this aspect, because they have to be sure and to assure that people who go into a criminal justice meeting, they really agree freely to participate in this. And also has to analyze the feasibility of doing an encounter like that, because it's complex, and be aware about the potential re-victimization of the victim. So the role of the mediator or the facilitator is very important here, to assure that people are going freely into these meetings. That is very important, more important than to decide previously if some crimes can go or not to a restorative meeting. Well, then there are some questions about the community involvement in these processes, in particular in restorative justice, for example, if the mediators can be private or people from the civil society, or is better than mediators or facilitators are people hired by the state to do that job. In that, what is the role that the community pay here, and also what are the limitations? And I think that the community involvement in criminal justice system in general is very beneficial for the system itself, for the community. There is a democratic element in the involvement of people in the reality of the criminal justice system. So in that way, I think that we should facilitate the involvement of people of the community in the intervention of these processes, but because they are complex and emotions are involved and people get in a very personal way involved in the processes, there is people that have to have some learning about this and going through capacitations so they can do a good job. Also because the conflicts that are involved in the criminal justice, a lot of times, are very local, and the community understands better the reality of the conflict, and also people who get involved in the criminal justice system can get as well understand the reality of the system. So this is in two ways. The criminal justice system can be benefited by the knowledge of the people, and the people get a more interesting approach or a closer approach to the reality of the criminal justice system, so that it's beneficial for both parts. But there also are limits to this involvement, mainly regarding the legality of the interventions. The community can do things for a very for good principles or in good faith, but sometimes the interventions are not good for the people that are being subject to the intervention. So that is a possible problem. And also these interventions should follow standards and should follow the models of intervention that are proven, and the people the idea is that people who get involved in the criminal in a restorative conference or a mediation, they have to be better after the intervention. So we have to be sure as a state that this is going to happen. But the involvement itself, I think, is a very good element for a democratic implementation of the criminal justice system. Then there is a question that is not related exactly with restorative justice, but in some ways could be also. It's about the relationship of if is there a relationship, positive or negative, between citizen security on the one hand and prison overcrowding on the other hand. These elements are both part of an integral phenomenon, or we should think about them independently. One thing is prison and overcrowding, and then and what are we going to do about that? And in the other side of the question is that this citizen security. This is a question that is very interesting because allows us to see the criminal justice system as a whole system. Everything that happens in the very first steps of a criminal justice procedure, indeed, a lot of things happen outside the criminal justice procedure, in the streets, with the intervention of the police, etc., are connected with the procedure and are connected with the punishment and are connected with prison and the possibilities that the people have to go away or rehabilitate after prison. So I think that there is a relationship. Indeed, if you think about it, if you think, okay, but we have this problem as well. We have the problem of prisons overcrowded because people think that the criminality is huge, so we have to put people inside prison all the time. So what we do with that problem? One possibility is to solve the overcrowding, expanding the system. So, okay, if we are taking a lot of people to prison, the response to that is, okay, we need to build more prisons because we have to punish all these people. But at the end of the day, I think that this will impact in a very negative way in diverse aspects of the citizen security, mainly because it reduces the possibility of social reintegration. We know that the possibilities of the prison to aim to these objectives are very limited. So if we don't think in alternative measures to solve the problem of overcrowding, and we just bet in that we need to expand the system, is very counterproductive and it's not going to help. On the other hand, if the policy is to rationalize or reduce the use of prison, then I think that that would help, but in the long term to citizen security. I think that there are not opposite things. And understand the problem like that is not good for the system and for the communities. I think that if we think that reduce the use of prison, or taking away people from prison, shouldn't never aggravate the situation. And this is because there is a lot of crime, more crime indeed, that is unreported, that is reported. So if we think that if we release the people who are now, serving a prison sentence, and that will have a direct impact in citizen security or in more crime, you can get that conclusion if you realize that the majority of crime is unreported. So we think with Olga that a state needs to do, and a specific government needs to do, is to build a coherent criminal justice policy. A criminal justice policy that aims to punishment, but in some type of criminality. If we need to do that, if we need to send someone to prison because we can't do anything better with that person, it's not okay. But if not, we shouldn't, for all the reasons that we manage about the impact of the prison in people's lives and in communities' lives. So we need to think, when we think about overcrowding, we need to think first, are the type of conducts that are we going to criminalize? What are the punishments that we are assigning to that, especially in the juvenile justice system? That should be a completely different system, a specialized system, aiming more to the rehabilitation and the needs, of the children, and also making them responsible, but meaningfully responsible. Think about all the alternative measures that are available to give a better response for the people involved in the conflict, like restorative justice or therapeutic justice, and also put our focus in preventing detention, because there are a huge amount of people who are serving serving sentence, not because they are condemned, not but because they are in preventive detention. So if we don't put a lot of limitations for these measures, we have the problem back. So there's this invitation to think of the criminal justice system as a whole, that any decision that you take in any part of the process impacts the others. And so there's a general invitation, a more specific invitation now to you to send us your questions and your opinions, so we can have a more productive dialogue today. So I will let you with Olga now. Bye.
Good afternoon. As Alejandra says, my name is Olga Espinosa. I am a lawyer. I am an academic professor at the University of Chile, and I have been working in different research related to prison system for almost 20 years. I would like to respond to some questions that some of you asked us. The first question is, do you know any evidence related to productive prisons? This is a very interesting question. I At first, because it's important to say that productive prisons are facilities that are focused especially to promote the work of prisoners, and that is very important. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that there are a lot of limitations of information to obtain information that can show us what kind of prisons, what are the results in terms of reentry processes in this kind of prison. And at the same time, it's very important to say that when you are thinking about reentry process, the work or the labor is a very important subject, but it's not the only subject that you can follow, you can invest to promote a very strong and comprehensive processes, reentry process. If we think about some experience, some important experience related to these productive prisons, we can identify it, for example, in Costa Rica, the units or the facilities which name is Unit for Comprehensive Assistance. These kind of units are some news facilities that are specifically focused in productive programs. Another example of this kind of facility is, for example, the centers for education and labor that are in Chile. This center are very interesting because they are open to persons or to people, to prisoners who are in a process to obtain their liberty, their freedom. So it's a way, or it's a specific place where people finish to accomplish their punition, but in with more spaces of freedom. And another interesting experience is the juvenile prison of Pacora, where that this prison is organized with an important focus in the labor. And this experience, there are not few, but it's important to say that we are in a process to try to evaluate and to identify the results of this experience, of these kind of facilities, and the link with a reentry process. The second question is about the role of citizen participation in reentry process. We can say at the same time of the other question that citizen and community participation are very important in this process. Why? Because when you are thinking about reentry, you have to understand that people after release will be connected with the same community where they used to live. So it's important to promote the connection of this community to be open to receive this person, and at the same time to be involved in the problems that link this person with criminal behavior. Some countries give a protagonist role to the citizenship, mainly after release, for example, as England. But in Latin America, one important experience is the Brazilian experience, where you could find a formalized institution, which name is the citizenship community, the citizen community that are involved with the reentry process inside prison and after release. This participation, in general, should be adapted and in accordance to the reentry policy in each country, because when you think about the citizen participation, you could realize that you could find different kind of initiatives. Some of them could be in accordance with human rights or with democracy principle, and some of them couldn't. So it's very important that when the criminal system of the prison system receives any initiative of citizen participation, that they could evaluate if this participation or if this initiative is specifically adapted or in accordance with the model of reentry that the state adopted. A third question is related to the main activities in reentry process. It's important to identify some very indispensable, the mainly path that we have to follow when we project a reentry process. At first, it's very important to know the profile of prisoners and their criminogenic needs. Why? Because if we don't know what are the characteristics of the people who are in prisons, we are in risk to implement a program that we're not able to respond to that needs or to respond to that profile. So it's very important to identify at the same time what kind of offer is delivered to prisoners and adjust that to them. Because we have to be able to know that our prisons have some characteristics and they have some limitations and have at the same time some opportunities. So if we know that, and we know at the same time the profile and the necessities and the needs of our prisoners, we are able to make the best match, the most productive match. So that's why it's very important that the design of the programs could be based in needs, in criminogenic needs and the profile of prisoners. After that, it's very important to generate different kind of mechanisms to for monitoring and evaluating the programs. The fourth question is related to the relationship between public and private institutions. So specifically, the question is, are you aware of best practices in public-private association? And we have to begin saying that public-private association is very important in reentry process. This partnership is very important at first because this partnership could generate job opportunities, could facilitate the introduction of prisoners in the labor market, could improve social links between prisoners and their communities, and also could support accountability process. It's important at the same time to say that a public-private association could be understood as not only the private sector, but at the same time, we could understand as the NGOs who participate in some reentry programs. So we know that, excuse me, this participation and this relationship is very important because the state is not able to respond to the whole complexity of reentry, and this kind of institutions are important to support this policy. And the last question is related to how can we understand or how can we manage the difficulties of some countries to accept reentry policies? And the question is, what can we do? With what we can do? It's important, very important, to transmit the message that reintegration is a strategic element in the design of citizen security policy, because it's an strategic way to respond to insecurity and crime, because we have to understand the citizen security policy as a complexity where we have to invest in prevention programs, we have to invest in control programs, but if we don't invest in reentry programs, we will be able to be successful in this policy. And at the same time, it's very important to commit the commitment of government with reentry policy, because it's the only way to develop a policy with introduce different programs, with introduce not only a strong investment in human resource, financial resource, but it's very important to transmit the right message for the community and for others policymakers that the only way to make a response efficiently to insecurity, citizen insecurity, is through a complex and strong integration of different areas where reintegration or reentry is very important. We would like to receive some question or some doubts that you could ask us. I don't know if you have to make any comment.
I'm okay with we just were thinking that if you don't have any questions in this session, we can close with some ideas. I think that to stress the point that the criminal justice system is a system that is integrated by different elements and parts, and all of them are connected, is a key idea for policymakers. So if the aim of the state is to deal with criminality and try to reduce it, we're not going to finish with the problem, you know. It's not the aim, but the aim is to manage them and not to hurt people more in the system. And also because it's very important to me when it's about children, you know, don't make more difficult the way out of crime. We should be thinking in a whole approach that starts at the beginning, as I said before, and finishes sometimes, and not in very much times, with people incarcerated. And also, I think that is key to the criminal justice policy. One thing that Olga said before is not only the criminal or the person who is been serving a sentence who has to be rehabilitated. It's the community as well. If you have a person who is punished and makes the process and stays some time in prison and make changes, and afterwards, when this person goes out and the community and the society don't accept them, it is very difficult for that person to get involved and not commit a crime again. If this person is not going to get a job, or if this person is going to be excluded from the political community, if this person can vote, for example, while he's in prison or afterwards, or things like that, are measures that put the people away from the system. They think, well, why I should go back and be a respectable citizen if the rest of the community is not accepting me? And that is a key question for this and the possibilities of reducing crime. So I think that we need to do a lot of things with the people who are involved in crime, with victims and with perpetrators, but also we have a huge job to do with the rest of the people, the people who don't commit crime but live, and eventually can, but also live in this society. So they have to accept these people when they are out of prison, because if not, everyone is going to be affected.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.